Okay, everybody. First, I didn't even ask. How's everybody doing? Everybody okay? Good? Everyone having a happy Hanukkah?
Yep.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
Good.
Good, good, good. That's important. It's a very nice holiday. It's one of my wife's favorites, so um, we get to enjoy our time. So let's see here. We are going to read the first Mishnah in Masachet Sanhedrin, Pereq Yod, the 10th chapter of Sanhedrin. And this is it's not we're not going to really try to go in super in depth. We're just going to understand what is this here. So the first Mishnah is as follows: Kol Yisrael yesh lehem helek leolam haba shene'amar va'amek olam sadikim leolam yerushu eretz. So all Israel has a, how do you say it? A share, a portion in Olam HaBa. This is a belief that we state, and we also use this Mishnah as an introduction to many things. When we're learning Mishnayot, we use this Mishnah as introduction. So whenever you're learning, for example, Pirkei Avot, the introductory Mishnah is always going to be Kol Yisrael Yeshem Hanom Haba Shneimar, and then the final Mishnah will be Rabbi Hananiah, etc. Mark, do you have a question?
Yeah. What is this document we're looking at?
Very good question. So what we're looking at here is the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a composition that was edited together by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, also called Rabbeinu HaKadosh or Rabbi. That's Rabbi Judah the Prince. He was the head of this project of a Beit Din that came after the destruction of the temple. And what he did is he compiled and edited. And there's another word that I think that describes what he did, but I can't really think of it right now. This work of oral Torah, of Torah Shebaal Peh, called the Mishnah. And his idea, the project, was to preserve and to standardize the rabbinic teachings of the first temple, of the second temple era. And basically everything from the project of Ezra and the Anshe Knesset Hagedolah, the men of the Great Assembly, onwards to post-destruction of the temple. And the goal was, because we were becoming so scattered and our Chachamim were becoming so minimal, we kind of lost our oral culture, our oral tradition. And so to preserve it so that it could be passed on and easily memorized, they compiled what they called the Mishnah. Mishnah is related to the term Mikra. Mikra is what we call the 24 books of the Bible. Today we call it the Tanakh, but classically it was always called the Mikra. Mikra is best translated as scriptures, but or it's often translated as scriptures, but Mikra is that which is recited or read. Kare, right? Like Kiryat Torah or Kiryat Shema. And that's that, or the Kriya, as you might hear it in Judeo-English. That is it also has a cognate in Arabic. If anyone can guess what the cognate in Arabic is, I'm pretty sure you can. The cognate in Arabic is Quran. So that is Mikra, Quran, they're related. The Arabic word Quran also means to recite or to read, right? So Mishnah is related to that, but it's not read, it's repeated. Shana, like a year, like there's a cycle of year, right? And there's a cycle of time, or something is Shaneh, it means it's the second time. Mishneh, there's 2 times to it, or we say Mishneh Torah means a repetition of Torah. But Shineh also had a rustic term that meant summary of. So it's a summary of the oral Torah. It's a summary of what the rabbis had to say. It's in very concise terminology. And it's also designed to be repeated so that it can be memorized easily, and that's why it's called the Mishnah.
And this is the basis of the Talmud.
Exactly. This is the basis of the Talmud. The Talmud is what you would call the Pirush, the explanation, or the commentary is not exactly correct. The explanation and the discussion that takes place. And a lot of the times what the Talmud does is that it limits the scope on what the Mishnah is saying, or expands it so we understand it in a different way.
You know, Yosef, it's interesting because the Hebrew Mem Shin Nun Hey also mean changing the Torah. Not that that's the intention of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi.
You're not wrong. That's what the job of the Chachamim is to do. Is to do? That's not correct. The job of the Chachamim is not entirely to change the Torah, but this is partially what Hanukkah is about. And just a brief synopsis on Hanukkah. When Epiphanes Antiochus, when he ruled Israel and Judea and Israel, so he ruled both kingdoms, and he ruled Syria and he ruled Egypt. He ruled all of the empire that basically Alexander the Great had left him, or he inherited because of the murders of all his, But he installed in the temple, and at this time our priests, our Kohanim, were basically the teachers of our Torah. But he undid that. He removed our Kohanim from office, installed his own Kohanim that he trusted, his own Kohen Gadol. I think his name was Menelaus. That was the name of the Kohen Gadol. He was so assimilated that he performed surgery to undo his Brit Milah, because he wanted to fit in with the nude Olympics that they would do on Mount Zaytim, on the Mount of Olives. It's just to demonstrate where he was in the culture. But his kind of thing is that he ruled in favor of assimilation in a way that was not in line with the mentality of the Torah. So he and his Sanhedrin ruled that it was kosher, it was mutar, to put a statue of Zeus in the temple. The reason being, because it says that we can't have statues of gold or silver. It doesn't say anything about statues of stone. So, because it doesn't say statues of stone, and that's what he did. That's where the thumb thing got invented. Because it doesn't say statues of stone, it's okay. It's kosher to put a temple. The what's it called? You got it. The statue of Zeus. So we, the people of Judea, did not like that, and we revolted and rebelled against the leadership. And this is kind of like the part of Hanukkah that most rabbis won't tell you about. It was a rebellion against the rabbis of the generation, who were, in the minds of the people, corrupting the message of the Torah. And then they removed them, and there was the Maccabees came in, and they established a dynasty. And really, the first generation of Maccabees were good people. The rest of them were very terrible and tyrants. But that's for another time. But in any event, the Chachamim can change the Torah, so to speak, but it has to go through a process, and there's a way for it. And the Mishnah does demonstrate the changes, the time access, if you will, that happens to our understanding of the Torah, and that's what the Mishnah does. That's why there's explanations and why there's machloketh, because one person might say, well, in this area we did this, and then we'll say, well, in this area we did that. There's never going to be a machloketh over something that Moshe Rabbeinu taught us. If Moses taught it to us, okay, he taught it to us. There's no argument. But if there was a development on the time axis, that's when you're going to have the arguments pop up. Now, back to our Mishnah, where it says, all of your people are righteous, and they will inherit my land. So they understand this. The Chachamim make a derasha off of this pasuk right here, right? This pasuk, you can find it in Yeshaya. It says right here, in Yeshaya chapter 60, verse 21. It doesn't matter what the context of the verse is in Yeshaya, because it's not important when the Chachamim are making a derasha. They're just taking the pasuk as a rhetorical device to explain their understanding and their belief, or the belief of Am Yisrael, and that belief is that everyone in the whole people of Israel inherit Olam HaBa. That being said, here are the people who don't inherit the world to come. So by default, it seems you get it, but if you do something that takes you out of the national belief, then you won't inherit Olam HaBa. Now, ha'omer ein tichiyat hametim, person who believes that who says there is no tichiyat hametim, ve'ein Torah min hashamayim.
Who says there's no what?
Excuse me, I'm so sorry. I'm so used to saying this word without translating it. Resurrection of the dead. Tichiyat, like to bring to life. Hametim, the dead. So, the person who says there's no resurrection of the dead, no Olam HaBa, seemingly. And a person who says the Torah is not from heaven, no Olam HaBa. Or these ve'apikorus. Someone who's an apikorus gets no olam haba. What an apikorus is, we'll save for later. Rabbi Akiba Omer, and here's a different opinion. So this is what's called the Satam. It's just the statement and ends here. Now Rabbi Akiba, he has additions that he makes to this. Afakore b'sefrim hayitzonim. Someone who reads outside books. We'll try to understand what that is. Does he mean the Odyssey? Does he mean the New York Times? What does he mean here? והלוחש על המחקה ואמר כה מלך אשר שמעתם במצרים לא אנשם אליך. Someone who whispers over their wounds this pasuk, that all the sicknesses that I placed on the Egyptians, I will not place upon you. So this was a common superstitious practice where you would have doctors come and they would see someone who was hurt and they would whisper the Torah over them as if the Torah is some sort of incantation, and they would to heal them. It's a big superstition, and believe it or not, it's most prevalent in the Orthodox world. Most Orthodox people, not most, I shouldn't say most, chas v'shalom. I know too many, one would be too many, but I know more than one Orthodox person who believes in this sort of voodoo when it comes to healing people rather than going to a doctor.
Even though Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah says that knocks you out of Olam HaBa.
Well, when they do it, it's okay because of reasons.
Okay.
it's yeah. Ava Shaul Omer, Ava Shaul adds, Af hahoge et Hashem be'otiotav. Someone who, how would I say this, pronounces the name with its letters, meaning they pronounce the ineffable name. And if you remember the scene from Monty Python where they're going back and forth, trying to stone the person who has pronounced Hashem's name, you'll see it's a historical document into what that possibly could have looked like. Not really, but okay. Yes, Yoram. Yoram's. Oh, there you go.
Well, I could see the people that say there is no resurrection of the dead and the Torah is man-made. Those friends of mine, and some of them are highly intelligent, also don't believe in our Olam HaBa, so they don't care. Let's take somebody like me, and maybe Mark could be there, no, though I cannot speak for him. I would say, I don't know. It's possible that Torah came from the Shamayim. It's also possible that it was written by very smart manipulators. I say, I don't know. That's quite frankly where I am. So I don't deny. Same with resurrection of the dead. I don't say it doesn't exist, nor do I say I believe be'emunah shlema. So I'm between the Rambam that I believe in wholeheartedly of all his principle. Me, I say I don't know. So am I doomed in the world to come, or could I come in?
Excellent question, Yoram. I have the same one.
Excellent question. Very excellent question. I'll have you know that this Ani Ma'amin Be'emunah Shlema is not HaRambam's words. This is kind of like a Christian influence on how we talk about these things, that I believe with my whole heart. And no, I don't think that affects anything. This says, I think, and I know, this is my reading of it, Ha'omer ein. It's a very staunch thing. I say that this, I know beyond any shadow of a doubt. It's not like, well, I don't know. It's like, it doesn't. This is a polemic against, and mind you, when this was captured, is a snapshot of what is going on in the temple at this time. Now, the Maccabees, since we've mentioned them, we can go a little bit into their history. They started out as tzaddikim, but over time they became tyrannical, and they started to side with a group of Yehudim called the Sedukim. The Sedukim were the priestly class that wanted to maintain a grasp on power that the Maccabees had given the Kohanim. Normally speaking, you have separations of powers. You have the Kohanim, you have the king, and you have the prophets. And they are checks and balances on each other. They're all subjugated to the rule of the Torah, of the Sanhedrin. But when the Maccabees revolted and won the battle and lit Hanukkah, and there was a miracle to show that everything was okay, they eliminated the separation of powers between the kingship and the priesthood. They were the first priestly kings, and that led to a degradation of our society that eventually ended with the destruction of our temple. When they mixed things up, the Pharisees, the Pirushim, our rabbis, began to become a distinct class amongst the other rulers called the Tzedukim. The Tzedukim were students of a man named Sadok, who was a student of one of our Chachamim in Pereq Heleq, and because he says to serve Hashem like there's no reward, just serve him for the sake of serving him, they came away with the mistaken belief that there is no reward, there's no Olam HaBa, there's no Tihayat HaMetim, and they wanted to say that anyone who says this is misleading you and they're trying to destroy your belief. So here the rabbis are taking a hard line and saying, no. Anyone who says these things, they're not really amongst the people who should be leading us. They have no portion of the world to come because they don't even believe in the world to come. It's not talking about us today in our comfy postmodern society where we're agnostics about everything. No, it's talking about these leaders who came and were trying to uproot the traditional society of Am Yisrael. Irene and then Yoram, I think.
It almost looks like we usually deed before creed. In other words, action before belief.
Yeah.
And in this case, it looks like it's creed before deed, that you don't get even a chance to get into Olam HaBa if you believe differently.
That's what I'm saying. It has nothing to do with belief here, but has to do with ha'omer. Homer is an action. It's a person who is saying this, who is teaching this.
Oh, okay.
When we say when we say, what do we say? There's a saying we say in the Mishnah, we say, Hachamim omrim. There we go. Hachamim omrim. It doesn't mean like they say this. It means they teach this in public. This is the party line, of lack of a better word. This is what we're saying, the Torah is saying to you. I don't think it has anything to do with our beliefs. I think our beliefs are a separate thing that most of the time we aren't even really sure what we believe.
Okay.
I think in order to have a real strong belief, it has to be a real individuated opinion that you've come to on your own. I think and that's my opinion. You can disagree with me.
It looks like the utmost cancellation.
Explain that.
Meaning that if you say this, you're out of Olam HaBa.
Yeah, seemingly. That's what it seemingly seems to say. Okay.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
Yosef is teaching us how to thread the needle between almost non-belief and orthodox. Yoram, this is for us.
Now, this Pereq in Mishnayot, Mesechet Sanhedrin, Pereq Yod, Pereq 10, is famously called Pereq Heleq, after this word, after Heleq Olam HaBa. And there is a long commentary in the Siraj, the Kitab Siraj, which is the commentary of HaRambam on the Mishnah, on this section. It's a very fundamental or essential piece of reading, I think, because he explains very much our attitude of Midrash. How do we understand these concepts that really don't have, they're not legal, they don't seem to be legal concepts. Most of the people I think many people take this and turn it into like a theological doctrine or dogma system. And I don't think that's what he's doing here at all. He's simply presenting us the information that the Chachamim have encoded in this Mishnah and what was our traditional approach to things. And that doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't, I think a lot of people look at this and say, he's saying if you don't accept this, you're not Jewish. If you don't accept this, you're like blah, blah, blah. You're going, I have a hard time believing that. And that's my belief. I don't see it one way explicitly, clearly, one way or the other. But my understanding is that, like, a Jew who performs a single mitzvah, they get Olam HaBa. Like that's a teaching that we learn in the Talmud, and HaRambam also has to listen to the Talmud. So, in a sense, he doesn't say what people say he says. I just don't think that that's what he believes. Yoram, go ahead.
Again, to go to, let's say that at some point of your life, you say there is no resurrection of the dead and the Torah is made.
Mm-hmm.
But then you change your mind, like Mark and I are studying, because we like to have better answers to questions where we say we don't know. Possible, maybe not likely, but I don't say it doesn't exist. So if you, through studying, change what you said, can you get back in?
I think our religion famously doesn't believe in teshuvah. It's a one and done. If you mess up, to the hellfires forever. No. Of course there's teshuvah. You can do teshuvah. You can. There's a whole chapter. Everything is possible. There's no the gates of teshuvah are not locked. If you change your mind, you change your mind. That's fine. People change their mind all the time. Now, let's look here. Everyone can see the new screen, right?
Yep.
Okay, Tov. And then there's this one. So as you can see, there's a lot going on. Oops, I minimized. I didn't want to minimize everyone. There's 3 different things I'm going to try to weave together, and I'm not going to do it successfully in just one thing today. I'm going to tell you that. There is HaRambam's Igirot HaRambam Ma'amar Techiyat HaMetim. That's his essay on the resurrection of the dead. Then you have one that was written fairly, I should say, not very, but fairly recently, in the 1700s, by Menashe Israel. It was written in Judeo-Spanish in Holland?
Yeah, Menashe ben Israel. Yeah.
Yes.
Amsterdam.
And yes, in Amsterdam, exactly. And he wrote this called On the Resurrection of the Dead, and he has an explanation of it also. And then there's this other work, the Siraj, how do you say Siraj? The commentary on the Mishnah that we find in Pereq and the 10th chapter of Sanhedrin, which is what the Mishnah we just read. And that is this is the starting point that I think we should start, because as you can see, it has some length to it, and I don't want to read the whole thing. The whole thing should be read, don't get me wrong. Here he's talking about the different types of people who read Midrash, and like how most people are idiots and they don't know how to read it properly, and that like the people who read it properly are just interesting. He says, and the third, as God lives, is a very small, to the point that it's not fitting to call them a group, except in the same way as one says about the sun and the moon, really. That it's very unique, and these are only the people who understand how to read Midrash. They're so small. They're like the sun and the moon. They're very unique in the universe. But here, when we get to this part, he explains all of that, because most of what we're going to be talking about is midrashic, in the sense that it is a tradition that the rabbis give us. It's a derashah made on a verse like the one from Isaiah. It's some sort of reading of the Torah that's not, I don't want to say apparent, but it's not the original meaning, so to speak. It's a generated meaning. So we have to understand that when we read these generated meanings, we're reading a code, and we have to decode that properly and not take it as as the gospel, if you will, lahavdil ben kodesh lechol, that we're reading something that requires analysis and a thinking mind, a thinking brain. Okay, so this Hebrew is not good. It's just not a good version of the text. It's a sloppy version of the text, and it's a translation of the Arabic anyways. So why bother breaking our teeth over a dumb Hebrew? And let's just read the English translation, which is also, I'll be honest with you, not the best translation, but it's going to give us a flavor of what HaRambam is meaning to say here. And no offense to the person who wrote this. I just realized that was a very not who translated it, but whatever. And now, I will begin to speak about that which I intended. You should know that just like the blind man does not grasp the appearance of colors, and the deaf man does not grasp the sound of the voices, or the eunuch has any sexual desire, he's giving us like visceral things. And in fact, the word that he uses is much more crass, and at least in modern Hebrew, it's much more crass. But so too bodies do not grasp spiritual pleasures. We're just trying to explain Olam HaBa and all the things in Gan Eden is like trying to explain the color yellow to a blind man, or what a treble clef or a B flat sounds like to a deaf person. It's just not going to really translate. You could probably maybe get an idea, but it's not going to really translate.
Great.
And just like the fish do not know the element of fire, since they are in the element of water, which is its opposite, so too in this physical world, pleasures of the spiritual world are not known. Rather, we do not have among us any of this pleasure, but only pleasures of the body, that which is grasped by the senses, regarding food and drink and sex, meaning we live in a physical thing. Our brain is a physical entity. Our mind is a physical entity. There is a breaking point of the mind, and the mind cannot go any further than that. It's just, we just don't have the software. We don't have the hardware or the software to understand any of that. And anything besides these is non-existent for us, and we do not recognize it. And meaning that non-existent in the out of sight, out of mind, I can't even think about it. Neither do we grasp it at first thought, but only after great analysis. Meaning, this isn't something that you can just, it's not like reading a recipe. I do this, I do that, I add this, I put on tefillin, I put up a mezuzah, I learn Torah, I understand God, I understand Olam HaBa, I understand. No, this takes time, and this is what people, like in Eastern religions, people talk about reaching nirvana or reaching or other things. In Judaism, this is a similar concept of understanding Yichud Hashem, understanding Olam HaBa. These things aren't just like, I got it. It takes the Chachamim, and there's a whole other thing that's tangential to this. It's understanding that when the Chachamim give us these little seeds, if you will, they are planted in our mind, and they then grow. And then it's your job as the person who's owner of that mind to tend those saplings and to grow them into a garden. Now, and it is fitting that it is like this, since we are in the physical world, and that is why we only grasp the lower temporary pleasures. But the spiritual pleasures are permanent, lasting forever without end, and there is no connection or similarity in any way between these two types of pleasures. And it is not fit for us, the masters of Torah, I don't know what that, and not for the godly of the philosophers that we should. And I don't understand what that is. Let me check it.
Godly philosophers is what that is.
Yeah.
Talking about angels and stuff.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so it's not for it. So people, whether you are a person who has become a very understanding of Torah, or you're somebody who has delved into the God of the philosophers, and if you remember from the Kuzari, the God of the philosophers has to do with reaching this place of active intellect where you connect with the spirit of the universe, whatever that is. We should say that the angels or the stars or the spheres do not have any pleasure. Rather, they are true. They truly have great pleasure in that they know and grasp the truth of the Creator. May He be blessed. And so too, when the one that will be purified is purified, and he goes up to that level after his death, he does not grasp the physical pleasures and does not want them. Now that when a person is beyond their physical body, it'll be the opposite. Instead of wanting you will not desire the physical stuff anymore. You will be in this world beyond. But rather, it is similar to if a king who is the top of the government would divest himself of his kingdom and his government and go back to playing ball with children like he used to do before his kingdom. Meaning, when you are in a certain level in life, you move on beyond the things that you used to do. There were the activities that we did in childhood and ways we had of thinking in childhood that we kind of look back on now and go, that was interesting, or that was a weird belief, or I can't believe I thought that, or I can't believe I did that. You become a king now. You become a father. You become a mother. You become a person who is related in the world around you. You have responsibilities. You just can't. You not only can you just can't go back. Since that was in his being small of years, the translation is very odd. Since that was in his being since he was young.
He was young.
And he did not distinguish between the worth of these two things. Just as we today praise and elevate the physical pleasures and not the spiritual pleasures. And when you reflect on the matter of these two pleasures, you will find the inferiority of the one and the loftiness of the other, and even in this world you can do such a thing. And that is because you will find that most people always tire themselves and their bodies in toil and exertion. That has no equal, meaning it's very hard work where we're out here breaking ourselves in order to become stronger, in order to feed our families, in order that the worth and honor come to him and the people that elevate him. Anyways, and this pleasure is not pleasure of food and drink. It's temporary. All that's temporary. And likewise, many people will choose to take revenge on his enemies more than acquiring many physical pleasures. And also, many people distance themselves from the greatest of the physical pleasures out of fear that disgrace and embarrassment from people to come to him from this. That's so odd. Okay, I'm sorry for the weird translation. What he's saying here is that we're with spiritual people, what do they try to do? They become ascetics. I'm not going to eat. I'm going to fast. I'm going to fast 40 days for 40 days. And I'll eat at night. Or I'm not going to eat every Monday and Thursday. Or I'm going to only eat on Shabbat. Yes, Mark.
The author, I guess is HaRambam, is almost hypocritical in what he's saying.
Go ahead.
He's begun by saying, though us physical people can't conceive of spiritual, and now he's going into a discourse on spirituality.
We can't conceive of the world to come. That is like a fish trying to imagine fire living in a world of water. What the fish can appreciate is the sun. When they get to the surface of the water, they can understand and see the sun.
Threading that needle perfectly. Gotcha. Gotcha.
We can understand as an element of the spiritual.
Yep.
And we see that some of the ascetics, for example, they try to connect to the spiritual by minimizing the physical. By minimizing the physical, I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink, I'll abstain from sexual activity, whatever have you. That's going to therefore make, and that's what we say on Yom Kippur. Why don't we eat? Why don't we drink? Why do we do these things on Yom Kippurim? So that we can be more spiritual. We can connect. We don't have to be distracted by all this nonsense and connect with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. It seems to be the logical thing that human beings just do, and it's not necessarily. If we had a Yom Kippur where we didn't have to abstain from these things, psychologically we would probably have a harder time with Yom Kippurim. But psychologically, because we deny our bodies certain things, I think that the human being goes, okay, I can now approach God and look at me. I'm doing this. I'm sacrificing something to you. Even in the latter day writings of certain rabbis, they say that we don't have sacrifices today. But if you fast, it's like you're doing sacrifices because and they're basing this on old science, because when you fast, you lose blood and you burn fat. Oh, the burning fat thing is true, but because you lose fat and burn blood, or the other way around, it's like the sacrifices of blood and fat that we would give to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. We want to connect in some sort of way that we need to take away from ourselves. Okay, and if its matter is such in this physical world, all the more so in the spiritual world, and that is the world to come, that our souls will fathom there the knowledge of the Creator, may He be blessed, just like the supernal bodies fathom Him, or more so. The supernal bodies, what's he talking about? What is he talking about here? He's talking about what people would call angels. Not what people would call. He's talking about angels, and we see a little bit into the mind of HaRambam here, in the mind of the Chachamim, that angels aren't necessarily the flying, creatures. An angel is is a messenger of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he includes the planets and stars in this category. And planets and stars are in effect angels of God. Gravity is an angel of God. Dark matter, light matter, all this stuff, the stuff of the universe is closer to God, not because it's higher up in the sky. Somebody was telling me the other day that he had a rabbi growing up who told him he felt safer in airplanes because he was closer to God, and he wasn't kidding. No, they're not necessarily closer to God. They're in an airplane, and the stars aren't necessarily closer to God because they're in the sky. They don't have the imagination of humanity, so to speak. They are created and they are themselves. Okay. So this pleasure cannot be divided into sections. It cannot be recounted. And you will not find a parable by which to compare this pleasure. There was a poem somebody shared with me once. It was a love poem. And the poem opens, "You're incomparable, like..." And that's the end of the poem. So, yeah, there's nothing there's no way we can describe these pleasures. They are out there. We have nothing to even base our understanding on them. Which is why I think in our literature we don't have the same, like, you'll have mansions and there'll be feasts and there'll be this amount or that amount and you can marry this person, you'll see that person. Our Chachamim tend to stay away from it. Not to say they don't anthropomorphize the world to come. They do have a mashalim that they use to explain it, but they're not like the mashalim of other peoples. Mashalim is parables. But rather, it is as the prophet, peace be upon him, he's talking about Moshe, said, when the greatness of that good and its value were so wondrous in his eyes. Let me just a second here. The Hebrew here is too close to something else. The English, I mean. No, that's not there. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, I don't know. Okay, fine. Oh, right there. Okay, fine. Not what I thought. How great, he said, how great is your good that you have hidden for those that fear you. How great is your good? How great is the good that you have hidden for those who fear you, is how we should say that. Meaning, the prophet here is like saying it's the what's to come for those who fear you, meaning who do your will, who do the Torah, etc., etc. Okay. Yoram, is your hand up from before? Or is that a new hand? Old hand?
Old hand.
Oh, okay. Here, I'll put it up for you. All right. And so too, they, may their memory be blessed, said, and he's talking about here the rabbis of the Gemara, they say in Berachot, in the world to come there is no eating and no drinking, and no bathing and no anointing and no intercourse, but rather the righteous ones, and here's the parable I was thinking about, rather the righteous ones sit and their crowns are upon their heads, and they derive pleasure from the radiance of the divine presence. Don't take that. The whole reason HaRambam opens up with the how to read Midrash is so that we shouldn't read this Midrash literally. There's no sitting in Olam HaBa also. In one of the stories we have of Elisha Aher, Elisha ben Abuyam, there's a story that says that he went to Olam HaBa and he saw that the Metatron, who is the chief angel, if we will, if we're going to really just understand the metaphor, the chief angel, he saw that he was sitting and that he was writing. And because he was sitting, he was like, oh, there's sitting in here in heaven. And I understood there was no sitting. And because of that, he became an apikoros. Now that Midrash is also, a Midrash in itself, requires decoding. So obviously, if there's no intercourse and there's no drinking and there's no bathing, there's also no sitting. But here we say the righteous sit and their crowns are upon their heads. And we're going to understand. He wants to say by stating, and their crowns are upon their heads. What is that? The permanence of their soul in the existence of that which is fathomed by them. And that is the Creator, may he be blessed. In other words, the crowns on their heads is like to say that their souls are going to just exist on, and they're going to be perceiving the Creator. Whatever that means. Whatever that means, that's what Olam HaBa is, or part of it.
Are they using the word keser for that?
They are using the word keser for that, exactly. Yes, it should be. Anyways, here is the... Oh, no, they're not. They're atara. like a tiara is. I think we get the
okay.
word tiara from atara, but we also call an atara like on the Torah, right? We put in the atara. People also call it a keter. Now it's interesting. I'm not sure what the difference between a keter and a atara is. I know that an atara also is what we do with the taleth when you put it over your head. That's called ituf, and they call that thing that goes over the talet, the little band. You see sometimes Hasidim have very shiny ones made of gold or silver. They also call that an atara. So this we can see, I think, has to do with a mystical understanding of, not mystical, excuse me, a rustic understanding of how people used to dress. Also, people used to wear what's called a sudra, and many people call it a kafia today. And in fact, the word kippah and kafia, they share a root. That's the covering root, but it's just something that you put over your head, and they mazin shekhinah. The shekhinah is shining on them. I keep doing that and it keeps doing that. Let's see here. I have a chat question. Now, let's see here. Oh, I lost it. Where'd it go? We'll pause here. Wait. Before we pause, in the premise of the soul existence of the fathom by them, meaning, okay, we'll finish this thought and then we'll pause. Meaning, that which is fathomed, and now this is interesting because if we remember the beginning of the Kuzari, this is something we very much talked about, and seemingly was something we rejected. But here, HaRambam is bringing this in as a part of the understanding that the act of intellect is what is engaging the soul, and he are, it's a weird translation. Okay, meaning he meaning the act of intellect, and he are one thing, as the philosophers have mentioned in ways that are too lengthy for here. And by their saying, and they derive pleasure from the radiance of the divine presence, I would say that those souls derive pleasure in that which they grasp and know of the truth of the Creator. May he be blessed, like the holy creatures and the other divine levels of angels derive pleasure in the way they grasp and know his existence. So the ultimate pleasure of Olam HaBa, what he's saying, it's not something we can really describe, but we can kind of get to understand is that what's the pleasure deriving from? What is it? What is this whole thing? It's it's finally understanding Borei Olam. As much as we can even say that, even what we're saying, he is radiating, his presence is radiating on us, whatever that means. And it doesn't mean like I know people say like we're going to bask in the glory of God, and it sounds very boring. But that's not a physical thing here. It's something that is perceived by the mind. And that is the ultimate pleasure of Olam HaBa. We'll pause here for today. At this part. We didn't even get into Techiyat HaMetim, which he will get into. And then at the very end, when he goes over his principles, he gets into hot water because he doesn't explain it. He just says, we've already explained this. And people for that reason, people thought he didn't believe in it, and they called him a heretic, and that's why he wrote the whole essay to clarify his beliefs. Are there any comments, questions, concerns, complaints? Yes, Yoram.
Just a quick one. You see, today with virtual reality, you can get certain things and you will walk in the Kotel in Yerushalayim. Mm-hmm. And it's not physical. I can close my eyes and recollect amazing moments. They're not physical. So it's not comparable to the Olam HaBa, but I could see pleasure without physical pleasures, just in my mind.
You're close. This is also what the Chachamim are explaining. But what he's going to explain here is that it's still physical. What you're explaining is still physical because you're using your physical mind to imagine it. It's limited by the limitations of our minds. And
my mind is part of my soul, so I don't believe that my mind or elements of my mind would necessarily disappear in Olam HaBa, but that Mark and I would talk around 12. I have to run.
Okay, run. Any other comments, questions, concerns?
just once again, what is this document we're reading from?
So this document is called the Kitab Siraj. I'll put it in the chat. It's more commonly called in English it's called in English the Rambam's commentary on Mishnah. It doesn't have the same ring.
Okay, this is Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah. It's not the Mishnah Torah.
Not the Mishnah Torah.
Which Rambam also wrote, right?
Which Rambam also wrote. Siraj is an Arabic word which means lamp. And you're familiar probably with the Aramaic version, which is shiraga, which you might have heard in Yiddish as shraga. Israj, the j sound is like a j sound. So Israj becomes in Aramaic, it becomes shiraga. In Yiddish, it becomes shraga. It's a name. Some people are named shraga. But he called the book the Kitab Siraj, the book of the lamp, because what he's doing is that he's illuminating the words of the rabbis for us. He's providing a lamp to walk the path, basically. Because the Mishnah can be very terse and very, there's an economy of words. And if you don't have a proper lamp, you can make a misstep. So this is what this, and this commentary that he's giving us here is unusually lengthy. I'll show you in the book here. Here's the Mishnah, Kol Yisrael. I don't know if you can see this little line here. And then this is the commentary for several pages on that line. We're not reading the whole thing here, but it goes on for about 4 or 5 pages in small print. Because he wants to, and normally he just gives a line or two about what the Mishnah is saying, what the conclusion is, what's this, what's that. Here he goes into big depth, or whatever. He goes into real depth in order to clarify these positions specifically, because there was a lot of confusion over Olam HaBa, Gan Eden, Tichiyat HaMetim, the days of the Messiah. What are all these things? And he wanted to clarify it.
Do you know offhand when in the sequence of his writings this came?
Oh, very early. He wrote this when he was 21 years old.
Okay, this is one of the earlier writings.
Yeah.
Long before Guide for the Perplexed.
Long before Guide for the Perplexed, which he wrote later in life. He does change his mind in some cases. But he doesn't totally discount whatever he wrote when he was younger. He wrote his first book when he was like 15, 16 years old.
Right.
He wrote a treatise on logic. And when I was 15, 16 years old, I could write you a treatise on illogical behavior instead. But,
I couldn't write it. I was living it.
I was an example. Danny, do you have a question? No? Okay. Any other comments, thoughts, questions, concerns? Tov me'od.
This is great.
Good.
Did we finish the chapter in the Kuzari? Or
yes, we finished the chapter. And we started the second essay just to show us, because the second essay gives us a little bit of his prologue, or epilogue of what happened. He converts and he becomes, him and his courtiers, they convert to Judaism, and eventually it's very rosy, romantic picture of conversions in Khazaria, which probably didn't happen that way, but most likely he was probably the only person who converted. And it was to make alliance. It was to be politically neutral between the Muslim country on the left and the Christian country on the right. But anyways, it gives a very nice. But the reason he gives us that epilogue/prologue is to delve into the deeper concepts that he kind of touches on in the first essay. But now he's going to go into deeper depth in the second essay. But I thought before we do that, or even if we consider doing that, to really understand the last part of what he said. Of what is all these, because he just kind of leaves us off. Like he says, yeah, there's this, there's that, there's Olam HaBa, there's Gan Eden, there's Tichat HaMetim, there's the resurrection of the dead, but then it doesn't really explain it. And I think it's a fundamental thing that it's not so important to me. I mean, like, it is important, but like it doesn't really affect a person's day to day, right? But I do think that getting some insight on this can show us a little bit of like how we think, what we believe, who we are, and we can understand our day-to-day a little bit better through that lens. All right. Tov me'od. Thank you, everybody. Everybody have a Hanukkah Allegre. Happy Hanukkah. We're going to, let me stop the share and let me stop the recording. We're going to continue lunch and learn.